But we had Professor Sunetra Gupta from Oxford University on, and she was implying, and I'm mentioning you because you have a global mandate, a global view, was that a problem we don't think about in lockdowns is that they're very nationalistic. That if we lock down our economy, then it hits our economy. But it also means we're not buying stuff, we're not trading with weaker economies, we are not just destroying our own jobs, we're destroying the jobs of all those that in the poorer parts of the world that export to us. That seemed to me to be a reasonable point.
Really important point by Professor Gupta. I want to say it again. We in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns as a primary means of control of this virus. The only time we believe a lockdown is justified is to buy you time to reorganize, regroup, rebalance your resources, protect your health workers who are exhausted. But by and large, we'd rather not do it. Just look at what's happened to the tourism industry, for example, in the Caribbean or in the Pacific, because people aren't taking their holidays. Look what's happened to smallholder farmers all over the world because their markets have got dented. Look what's happening to poverty levels. It seems that we may well have a doubling of world poverty by next year. We may well have at least a doubling of child malnutrition because children are not getting meals at school and their parents in poor families are not able to afford it. This is a terrible, ghastly global catastrophe, actually. And so we really do appeal to all world leaders. Stop using lockdown as your primary control method. Develop better systems for doing it. Work together and learn from each other. But remember, lockdowns just have one consequence that you must never, ever belittle, and that is making poor people an awful lot poorer.
That was Dr. David Nabarro, the World Health Organization's Special Envoy on COVID-19. Appealing to global leaders, please stop using lockdowns as your primary control method. The WHO flip-flops again, urges world leaders to stop using lockdowns to fight COVID-19. In a stunning rebuke of the science and the doctors and leftist politicians and career bureaucrats in the U.S. and across much of the West, the World Health Organization's Special Envoy on COVID-19 has urged world leaders to stop using lockdowns as the primary control method against the spread of the Chinese Communist Party virus, commonly known as the novel coronavirus. Because there's consequences, right? The cure is worse than the disease. You need food. Zero Hedge asks, how long before this video is removed by Twitter? Very good point. Because Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube, they've all been appealing to the World Health Organization for better or for worse. But what happens when the science changes? Will they follow the science when it's not in their political interest? And, you look at it with doubling of child malnutrition, a doubling of world poverty. We were making great strides because of capitalism in eliminating world poverty, not through redistributing wealth, but through growing everyone's economy. Rising tide raises all boats. Not evenly, but look, that's the way it works. And so this Nabarro isn't the only scientist opposing lockdowns. There's something called the Great Barrington Declaration, where we have many of these public scientists and medical practitioners saying current lockdown policies are producing devastating effects on short and long-term public health. Signatories include Martin Kulldorff, professor of medicine at Harvard University and a biostatistician, epidemiologist with expertise in detecting and monitoring infectious disease outbreaks and vaccine safety evaluations. Thought vaccines were safe 100% of the time. He says the most compassionate approach that balances the risks and benefits of reaching herd immunity is to allow those who are at minimal risk of death to live their lives normally, to build up immunity to the virus through natural infection, while better protecting those who are at highest risks. So, there is no scenario where people don't lose their lives, and during a global pandemic, the left likes to blame Trump for every single one of those losses. There's just bad decisions and worse decisions. Now, Donald Trump, guided by principle, erred on the side of freedom. He said, well, let the governors manage their states the way they see fit. But he erred on the side of freedom. That's having principles rather than jumping at every new data point that falls out of the sky. Err on the side of freedom. And it's funny, even in Washington state, our governor mandated masks in public. By the way, almost nobody wears them except in stores where you have no choice. But the day after he made it required for everyone to wear masks, he comes out and gives a press conference not wearing a mask. And when asked, why aren't you wearing your mask? You made this mandatory. He says, I'm exercising my First Amendment right. To which I would agree for once with Jay Inslee. Yeah, you have rights. Let's keep our freedoms safe, and we're going to have to deal with, these things do happen. Disease does happen. And you can see now the World Health Organization coming out and essentially agreeing with the Donald Trump's policy and position. Let's reopen business. Let's get people working again, because there are consequences beyond simply the coronavirus. Malnutrition is doubling. Chinese children, all children, malnutrition is doubling. That's catastrophic. That's catastrophic. You're going to see a lot less tall basketball players. So, the article goes on and talks about delegating to the governor. And the Mises Institute talks about how lockdowns only serve the progressive political class. And that's the big question. Now that the science has changed, are we going to see the Democrats change their position? Are the Democrats going to listen to science? Joe Biden said he'd be willing to shut down the economy. I ask, will Joe Biden be willing to reopen the economy?
Sworn in come January, and we have coronavirus and the flu combining, which many scientists have said is a real possibility. Would you be prepared to shut this country down again?
I would be prepared to do whatever it takes to save lives, because we cannot get the country moving until we control the virus. That is the fundamental flaw of this administration's thinking to begin with. In order to keep the country running and moving and the economy growing and people employed, you have to fix the virus. You have to deal with the virus.
So if the scientists say shut it down?
I would shut it down. I would listen to the scientists.
I would listen to the scientists. Well, and I like to link all this back to people's thinking on climate change, because we have an example here where science was wrong and dramatically wrong, and here we are flip-flopping, it's 7-8 months, because what science is it uses the scientific method. It's repeatable and reproducible in a lab. What you have people doing when they're modeling is they're attempting to take a simplified version of reality and draw these conclusions. Well, that's very dangerous, because human beings can't model complex phenomenon. Just look at the housing crash in 2008. All the models said that we were going to be making money on our houses from here to infinity, just a matter of months before the prices of houses crashed, and it almost tanked the entire economy. Human beings can't model complex phenomena. I point how we look at the last 30 years of global warming models, all wrong. All wrong. You saw Glacier National Park, they had to take down their Gone by 2020 signs, that the glaciers were going to all be melted at the visitor center. They had these signs. And it's not just that the scientists were off, the glaciers shrunk, but they're still there. No, the glaciers are actually growing. And all these models, ice-free Arctic by 2012, by 2014, glaciers gone by 2020, they've all been not just somewhat wrong, but totally wrong. Because you're relying not on really science, not the scientific method, but statistical and data analysis. You're using computer programs, which are a necessarily flawed and simplified tool. Just like I pointed out, you can't consider yourself a good mayor just because you're good at SimCity 2000. It's a simulation. It's dumbed down. There's a lot that's taken out of it. And it's the same with global warming. And so now we're supposed to believe that the predictions go out till 2100, 80 years into the future. We've got 30 years of those models being totally wrong. 30 years they can't do this. and yet we're supposed to believe 80 years in the future they know what's going to happen? All these COVID models were wrong. All the advice now they're coming out, whatever they said to do, now they're saying not to do. You know, the science. Be very careful when people worship science. Science is good information. Pay attention to the science. But here we can see, plain as day, the science was wrong.